Welcome to KJ's Corner. I am your host, Kyle John Fenton, but I am not pretentious, so I go by KJ. And with me, I have Rue Dickinson of Alpha Presales. To intro him, I'm going to read right off of his LinkedIn profile. He's the CEO at Alpha Presales, which we'll get into what that is here in a minute. He says, give me a smart technical person. Hey, I'm a smart technical person. And I'll turn them into a smart, technical, confident badass that closes more deals with less meetings. Sales engineers, I'm looking at you. By that, I would argue you are probably a sales engineer coach now. So with that, before we get into that, Rue, how are you, man? I know we're cutting it up before, but let's let the audience know. How you doing, man?
I'm excited to be here. I was super pumped when you reached out, so I couldn't be more excited about this.
Yeah, well, in the same vein, right? Obviously, you know, we have a relationship, and in case you don't know, are you a mentor with Presales Collective? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So through that, I believe you met Dom, who's another one of our hosts, as part of the Breaking Into Tech umbrella, which I also didn't say, KJ's Corner, as a part of I'm Breaking Into Tech. And they had said, you guys have been cutting it up for a while. And I was like, well, if you and Dom get along, I'm like, well, then me and Rue have to get along. And the importance of networking on LinkedIn. I've always commented on your stuff once I got connected to it. I think you always have a lot of insight to give. So if anything, you're a great follow. So just as much as you're excited to be here, I'm excited to talk to you because I think you have a lot to offer. I think your career path has been great. You're obviously working for yourself now, which is awesome. So tell us about that. So what is Alpha Presales in general?
Well, as the headline said it, my goal is to take smart technical people and turn them into smart, technical, confident badasses that close deals faster.
Sure. Love that.
But what really sparked this is, you know, we can get into kind of my career, but I made the switch from sales engineering into sales. And I will never forget this moment where I hadn't prepped really well for this meeting and I hadn't prepped my SC as well as I should have. And I didn't relay like every question that I'd asked in the prior meeting. And so we kind of both walked into this meeting a little bit unprepared. And I'll never forget, he asked a question that I had already asked. And I felt like shit because I'm I'm going to look like a bozo, not communicating.
Yep.
And the client goes and gives them a completely different answer, way more information, way more complete.
Sometimes that happens. Yep.
And that was the moment where I was like, oh my gosh, they have so much more power than I do as the sales rep. And it was on that where I thought, oh my gosh, like I've got to help these folks ask the right questions, be more confident, and have that presence in an actual sales cycle because you're just given respect and credibility as a sales engineer. And if you don't know how to use it, you lose that opportunity. So that's really what I'm looking to do.
Yeah. And I was going to ask because I think it's something that I learned in my career too, because I wasn't a sales engineer prior to UiPath. So my first sales engineering experience was there, but I found really smart reps did this. They used me as that weapon where they would say, I'm going to throw him at this conversation because they're going to know he's not an industry expert, but they are going to know he's a technical expert. So if you can frame a little bit of conversation around that, people like you, especially on the sales side, are super smart and go, I'm going to use him to carry a lot of my conversation and I'm going to come around it and put some polish. And I was like, do you think that that's like a new age of motion? Do you think that that's just good selling? Like, what's your perspective around that? Because I completely agree on the credibility part. And I think if you're trying to break into sales, maybe start with sales because sales engineering is a little difficult to sometimes break into now. But would you argue that having that dichotomy between an AE who's really smart about the selling motion and a really, really proficient sales engineer is like, is that the pinnacle, so to speak, or the nirvana? I think, yeah. But like, like I said, I completely agree with your credibility around sales engineering, but I just want to hear a little more of that because I want to dig deep into that because I think that's key. You hit it right out of the gate.
For sure. It's all about like that partnership between the two. So as a sales engineer, my approach was always adapt and figure out what my AE is good at and then kind of complement them.
Keep going. Keep going. Oh my God, I love it. Keep going.
And I take the same approach with the SEs, right? Because look, the most important thing for me as an AE was how do I make sure that my SE is as confident as possible and prepared for that meeting? Because nobody wants to hear from me. So I think the smart AEs get that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's you know, certain SEs will view it as like, oh, they're making the SE do all the work. It's no, I want to prep you, and I want anything that I would say that would sound better coming out of your mouth for you to say.
Love it. Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, that's the partnership like aspect. But you know, you can do this on both sides. You can be the AE that kind of adapts and meshes to your SE, or you can be the SE, or you guys can both meet in the middle. I mean, figure it out.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing you talked about is like teaming there. And I agree with you, right? And I'm sure there's probably some credence and truth to this comment I'm going to make, is that I'm noticing in the selling motion in general, especially with software sales, it seems like there's almost a mesh between the roles now in some respects. I think if you're at a startup, like they're probably expecting reps to be a little more technical because they don't really have a sales engineering core to like demo the stuff yet, right? But I think the ones who are going to thrive from that are the ones that do have a little bit of a technical aptitude and do kind of understand, oh, okay, I know what this technology purpose is, but now how can I make myself a little dangerous from a little bit of like implementation or customer success? And I think those individuals are the ones that seemingly grow within an organization and stay at an organization, and sometimes even end up becoming leading like a sales org or leading a pre-sales team or whatever. Would you agree to that to some respect? Because I'm noticing the roles kind of mesh. And I'm finding I'm probably going to follow a similar path as you. I figured when I'm in my 30s, right? Because I'm almost there, 29. I figured eventually later in my 30s, I'm going to be a salesperson, right? And I feel like it's the natural progression. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts around that?
As you said that, something that immediately came to mind was after I left just to do alpha pre-sales, I asked a couple of clients, like, hey, what did you like or not like about working with me now that I'm not your sales rep anymore? And one of them is like largest global truck manufacturer in the world, said, I liked that you had both sales and technical skills in one, because it's really it's way more efficient to have to deal with it. And he knew that he couldn't rely on me to do POCs or demos or anything like that, but he knew I had enough technical competence to figure out like what was needed.
Sure.
And he said, from a buyer's perspective, I can't remember his exact words. I think he said it was sort of a more complete, or a more, I don't know, for lack of a better word, vertically integrated selling motion, right? Like it's one person to deal with.
Yes.
Because it's annoying when you, as a buyer, you come in, SDR calls you up on the phone, then the AE goes and asks you some questions. Do you have budget? Do you have time? What are you selling again? I'm not really sure. Let me go ask the SE. And then it's like, I mean, nobody wants to deal with that. So it's, I wouldn't say it's necessary, KJ, but it's way efficient when it's that way, when you know enough. And the buyers just love that. Oh, you know what he said? He said, you created more of a one-stop shop buying experience for me.
Love it.
And I was like, ooh, that's good. That's what buyers want. One-stop shop.
Well, yeah. I mean, when we go to buy, like, and I think the dichotomy comes between, like, I guess B2C versus like B2B. And I think that what you're describing happens more in B2B, where there's a lot of layers in B2B, but B2C is usually pretty simple. It's like, oh, I go to an e-commerce, like Amazon's like the greatest example. Like, oh, I can search, I have a bunch of different options, I can review everything. It's a one-stop shop, right? Like, even though there's a ton of different vendors there, it's easy. And I think consumer-based products are there. But then when you get to B2B, it's like you still got to kind of create a little bit of that B2C motion, but also still live in that B2B realm. And I think that's what you're talking about. I think that's kind of where we're ending on, but I love that. But before we talk about that, the whole point of this podcast is to not talk about why you're great today, but what are the things that you did to make you great, right? So if we go back in your career, right, it looks like you actually got your start. And we were talking about this before. It looks like you were getting an engineering degree, Bachelor of Science at Virginia Tech. And just to give you some shout out here, looks like you were an investor in the university endowment stock portfolio, which is pretty awesome. You were a tour guide, which I think is great. And you were the captain of a men's lacrosse team. So it looks like you're a little athletic too, just to give you some credence to, do you still play? Do you still do any of that stuff, or are you too old now?
I tore my Achilles tendon 5 months ago playing soccer. So.
And he's out for the count.
Yeah. So I think I think I'm hanging up the cleats. We'll put it that way.
I think so. Yeah, I think that. Or you're wearing like a massive brace. But you were at Virginia Tech. You got a Bachelor of Science. It looks like your first gig was being a financial analyst. But I think we had talked about this before. You were taking that job while you were in college. So your first job was actually at Deloitte post-college. But I do want to talk about that New York life a little bit, because you had alluded to something to me prior to us recording, which was that you wanted to pursue, engineering. And then something happened. So I'm going to let you take the floor. Explain to us your college experience that ultimately led you to Deloitte. So I think that that's really good for us to hear.
Yeah. So when I grew up, I was just really good at math and science. So everyone told me to go be an engineer, and I didn't even know what an engineer was, but I was like, okay, fine, I'll go be an engineer.
Sure.
So I enrolled at Virginia Tech as an industrial engineer. You start off in general, and then I got through it, and I was, I don't know, maybe halfway through, and I ended up doing a co-op in a manufacturing facility.
Wow. Okay.
So I did that. I'm in Radford, Virginia, like middle of nowhere, Virginia, and I'm in this manufacturing facility. And I'm generally a pretty happy guy. And my roommates joked, like, we've never seen you that depressed for that 4 or 5
Man, that
months.
sucks.
And it wasn't for me. It wasn't stimulating enough. And don't get me wrong, I love operations and I love efficiency, but it was the same thing every day. And the goal is like, how do we shave seconds off of this assembly line type thing? So at that point, I had a little bit of a crisis, because I'm thinking, how am I going to get out of this situation? Because if I don't like it now, I'm definitely not going to like it in the real world. So
Good
what
insight.
I ended up doing is getting involved with the student-run stock portfolio. I was trading energy stocks with the university endowment money, which was super cool, because you've got like...
Hold on. Backtrack. They trusted some bunch of college kids with endowment money to make more money.
Wild.
That is, I mean, you probably had an advisor who probably worked in if I had to guess, it probably wasn't just the inmates running the asylum, but that is an awesome program. Was that like sponsored through like the business school there, or was that just an open thing that anyone could do?
So it was like try out. I mean, it's like harder to do that than most sports teams.
I mean, sure. Yeah.
But yeah, they had like sort of interviews, and then you went through, and then they ended up giving you, I think it was, I don't know, percentage or something of the university endowment money. And then we've got an advisor to approve things, but basically we would invest that. And it was through, I think, the business school ultimately, but it was for folks that wanted to end up on Wall Street. And I looked into that really heavily, because I was like, well, I don't like the engineering bit, but I do like finance. So let me look into that. Ended up going and looking around, talked to New York Life, talked to a bunch of other firms, and you realize I remember asking this question specifically of one of the guys there. He's a trader at, I think it was at Merrill at the time, or Bank of America. And I was like, dude, I'm in engineering. I don't know what to do. I want to get out. Should I like double major? Should I do like accounting and finance or something?
Right.
He's
You're like, I'm 19, 20 years old. I don't know what to do. Help.
Right? Help me, please. And he's like, dude, you're set. That guy right there, chemical engineer. That guy, nuclear engineer. That girl, like electrical engineer. And I was like, no way.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, the degree doesn't matter. So at that point, I decided to continue out with the engineering degree, but I was working at New York Life, doing some investment analysis stuff. And then when I ended up graduating, I went right to Deloitte. So that's kind of my roundabout, but I had that kind of crisis. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, because you go into school with one idea. I don't know what the stats are for how many times people change majors, but
it's got to be a crazy percent. I changed 3 times.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What did you do?
So I went in thinking I was going to be a lawyer. Now, mind you, I have to, preface this. I grew up in a very different demographic and a different geographical location in comparison to where I live now. I live in the 15th most populated city in the United States. I grew up in a town of 2,500 people.
Wow.
So like I've been through the whole gambit. So when I went, thinking I wanted to be a lawyer, granted, and we're not going to talk politics or anything, but I grew up in a very Catholic, Italian, conservative area, right? So my worldview was like rinky dink in comparison to all of a sudden I go to Syracuse, right? So I originally go in and I'm like, my parents are always complaining about whatever, right? Like people in how small towns go, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man, I want to go make a difference in that. So I take on a poli-sci econ double major, thinking, I want to be a lawyer. Man, don't I take the first like legal writing course, Maxwell 1, 2, 3. And I go, yeah, I'm not doing this. And then I was pursuing a BS in economics. And then they started adding like derivatives to math. And I'm like, all economics is supply and demand. Stop adding fictitious things that don't make any sense, because fidget spinners break this every model every time. You know what I mean? Like, and at the time I wasn't willing to do more work at that. And I realized I lost the drive and the motivation to be a lawyer. And then that's where I eventually shifted into Whitman, which is the business school. And then even then I wasn't getting enough. So you already had the engineering. I eventually fell into information management and technology. That was eventually the degree I got, but I complemented that with a minor in marketing, because going to a small town or growing up in a small town does have its perks if you're smart. Because I went into college as a sophomore, so I still only went for 4 years and was able to shift that. I went in with 35 credits. Yeah. So
Wow.
so it was super, super helpful. And we had a grant program and so on and so forth. And honestly, like, not for nothing, like we had a good class, but like not everyone was like getting, the A's and whatever. It's a lot of like B plus students, but the rest of us who were kind of the A's, we were the, the golden kids, so to speak, right? But they gave us a bunch of funding and they allowed us to do it. We got grants, scholarships, the whole nine.
That's awesome.
It's because we had it available to us. So it was really easy. And I was also, I was an athlete in school too. So I was like the Zac Efron, where I was in the musical and the starting quarterback. But mind you, it's not too difficult to be that when your competition is like nobody. But in all seriousness, that's what I did. So I can totally relate to switching majors, because it's just sometimes you go in thinking one idea, but we're too young, I think, to really kind of have a sense of that, unless we have familiar pressure or whatever. So yeah, I shifted 3 times. Right.
Yeah.
But now I'm here, and obviously, we're having this conversation and we've all kind of aligned. But yeah, so I get it. But I get wanting to complement business and IT. And I think that's where you landed, right? Where you had the engineering, that's really information technology as a generalization, obviously thinking more tactically. But then obviously getting some finance type stuff. I mean, that's the best in breed. And that's where a lot of technology innovates, is really in the finance space. So talk about with that. So let's talk about actually moving into Deloitte. So you did your financial analyst gig. That would have been obviously throughout college. And then you became, it looks like your first job was actually as a developer. Was it full stack development at Deloitte? And then obviously you moved up to manager. So walk us through the projects about how you grew up in Deloitte, because you spent 4 years there, which is actually a pretty long time, starting out from really being a staff consultant all the way to becoming a manager. So walk us through that.
I'll tell you the story my old boss used to say. So it was basically day one after onboarding, and I didn't know how to code. I took one coding class in college, like C++ or something. And he gives me like the assignment, and I was like, "Hey, I don't know how to do this." And he kind of looks over at me and he's like, "Oh, are we gonna Google it on your machine or mine?" And like, I was like, "Oh, that's how you do this."
Like, so, that's how we do this? Okay, got it.
So then I realized that basically all of coding is just Googling somebody else that's already built it on Stack Overflow, copying and pasting.
Someone smarter than us.
Like, so yeah, I would say that my best development skills while I was coding C#.net and JavaScript and other things, like the best is just you get good at Googling. It was probably the older version of ChatGPT now, where it's
for real.
You figure out anything out, you just put it there. So I did that for a while, and then just kind of progressed. It was doing full stack. I mean, it started off just front end easy stuff, and then you're updating databases, and you're like, oh man, you break the build, going to try to deploy code to production, and then you're doing it at like 12 o'clock at night, and all sorts of stuff. So I have a real appreciation for true like software development. I liked that. When I kind of moved on to doing more consulting type stuff, more client facing stuff, running projects, and really moved around to kind of more management type stuff. So I liked it. Ultimately, it's a real challenge when you're trying to figure out what your niche is in consulting, because if you go the software development route, like you don't get your management skills, and you kind of got to be one or the other. It's just the same problem that you have in your most careers, where if you're an individual contributor, you're honing the skills. If you're not, you're honing your management skills, which are softer skills and they're harder to put on a resume. So that's just the dilemma there. But it was a great background and great kind of understanding of how to code, and then how clients work and how people make decisions.
So let's talk about that a little bit too, because I also, recommend to people who are trying to break into like tech sales. I'm like, you know what you should do? You should try to break into a consulting firm, and they like have
Yeah.
no clue about that. And I kind of want to go a little tactical in terms of like the roles. So like, correct me if I'm wrong, but Deloitte, the way it's set up is you do like you start out as like a staff consultant, right? Which is really kind of entry level, and then I believe you go to your consultant level, and then at that point, I think it's senior consultant, and ultimately becoming a manager. Is that right?
Yeah.
What were
Yeah.
the
Senior
thing?
manager up on up.
Sure. And then at that point, you're bought into the company, and then you're owning like
Yeah.
portions of it and blah, blah, blah. Right. It's either up or out is usually the mantra at consulting,
Yeah.
especially the big four. Right. I worked at EY, so I get it.
Yeah.
So, but the reason I bring that up is what were some of the things outside of just the role? So like, I think people listening to that understood, okay, full stack development. I learned Java, regardless of whether you Googled it or not, you were still applying the code that you had in some sort of project. What were some of the things that you did during your tenure to get you to that next level at Deloitte? Because 4 years to becoming a manager is actually pretty damn good. I knew people that were senior consultants at EY for like 10 years and they never could get to that manager level. So what were some of the things that you did? I guess I don't want to say externally or not, but what were some of the different things that you did outside of just learning the tech really that allowed you to have those conversations for promotions? I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, the management bit was not. I was, Deloitte has their titles of
Sure.
senior consultant, manager. I got to senior consultant. I was doing
Okay.
management of the actual team.
Got it. Okay.
Um,
Understood. Okay. So that would be
yeah,
okay. So at EY, my lens is staff senior manager. Is
yeah.
that where? Okay. So the lens is different. That's fine. That's good to know. Okay.
So how the role kind of changed is when you're in that individual spot, just slinging code, and then you move over into like more consulting, managing the group. Like I was
Mhm.
actually managing people within, I want to say it was a year. And part of that was finding a very small team to be on.
Okay.
Um, what I ended up managing from, I want to say it was a year or two in, was the O&M team for one of the clients. So we had probably 14, 15 people on like my general area. And
Okay.
there were a couple of us that needed to just do maintenance of apps. At that point, they stuck me in front of it. And I don't really know all the details on why, but I think it was just because I'm generally a good, like kind of coach, mentor type
Sure.
thing.
I mean, well, naturally, it's what you do now.
Yeah, you kind of grow into that, and it's like, oh
Yep.
well, why not do this full time?
Right there with you, man. Like, I
Yeah.
get it.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the biggest like tactical advice I would give for that is express your interest in doing something like
Mm,
that. For me, I made it pretty clear like I didn't want to be a hardcore developer, but I think a lot of people just kind of go through the motions and they expect, especially at a company like that where we take care of our people, and I truly believe that they do. Your bosses don't know exactly what you want, so you have to communicate
mhm.
that clearly. So I liked doing that because I was able to manage a team, and then you get new analysts come in, and now you're managing other analysts and stuff, and you're doing all the teaching, and you kind of move up the ranks through there. So I think people naturally gravitate to what they're good at, but don't assume that just because you're doing it means your boss thinks that you like it or doesn't think they like you. You have no idea until you tell them that.
Yeah, and I think it's just a good piece of advice just in general, whether or not you end up in technology specifically. I think that's so key is that sometimes I feel like the roles in management specifically, and I was getting some of this, right? I wasn't getting a ton of it because I wasn't actually a manager at UiPath, but I recognize that if you are in the minutia of having the meetings and having the conversations, it's very difficult to know exactly what your people are working on the ground and being able to apply it to whatever the impact is. So I think the net of this, and I think anyone in HR would probably recommend this as well, be your own advocate. Like you kind of have to. And sometimes that does require a little bit more meticulous work on your end. And you'll be like, oh man, I've just been slinging code for 60 hours. Why do I have to do this? But if you want to get to that level, sometimes you kind of have to do that and then
Yeah.
create that demand. And I did that. That got me to senior very quickly at EY. And I'm sure you did the same thing because, 4 years, like I said, even going from, staff to senior or staff to consultant to even senior is pretty good. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that for everyone while just listen to that. So you're managing people at Deloitte. So managing people there, managing projects, and then eventually it looks like you leave from full stack and then you decide to join this company called Appian, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Appian's business process modeling. at the highest level, I think. And I'll let you explain that a little bit more. And that is where I really think this whole kind of culmination of skills kind of really happens, because you spent a long ass time there. You were there for 8 years and 3 months. And it looks like, and you even have it listed there, started as a sales engineer. And I'm willing to bet someone scoped you and said, do you want to do the sales engineering thing? And you were like, what is that? And then you eventually became a sales rep. So walk us through getting that job as a sales engineer. What led to that? What you learned about sales engineering at Appian specifically, and some cool projects you might have worked on. And then ultimately, what was the push that made you become the sales rep? I would really love to hear that whole story. Obviously, pick and choose whatever you want.
Yeah.
But I'd love to really hear how you got the job, what cool projects you did, and what made you transition. So, floor is yours.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Am I dating you a little bit? I'm sorry.
No. The thing that is interesting is I knew what I was getting myself into with sales engineering. And this is
interesting. Okay.
And I actually looked at it when I was in school, when I was at an industrial engineer.
Wow.
And the company I was looking at was Train, but it was doing HVAC. And so this is where I wasn't sure if I should go into consulting or sales engineering right out of school.
Wow. Okay.
My reason why I ended up going to consulting is because I knew longer term, those would be more transferable skills. If I went to Train and did sales engineering on HVAC equipment for huge buildings, like commercial buildings, I knew I would get really good at that. And I knew sales engineering was right for me from the minute I heard about it in college. But I was like, I don't want to be stuck in that industry and have the same issue that I had with being in a manufacturing facility. So I did Deloitte for a while. And then an interesting thing happens. And this is my recommendation for people that are trying to get a job. Just get a job. And here's why I say this. Just get a job, because it makes it easier to go and transfer to other jobs. So this is why I say this. When I was at Deloitte, everybody was hitting me up to go, recruiters all over. We were in a good market, right? Like I haven't seen a whole lot of that more recently.
More recently, but I remember that too. When I was at EY, it was boom, 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 boom. It was crazy. Yeah.
So actually, like, folks had reached out, and I immediately, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in anything except for sales engineering. And then this recruiter replies back to me. She's like, oh, that's exactly what we were thinking. I was like, oh, tell me more about it.
Just say what you're feeling. Don't give a candid. Hold on. Side note real quick. To people reaching out to you as recruiter, don't burn a bridge and say what you're looking for. Half the time, if they're reaching out for one thing and it's kind of similar, they probably got something else that you wouldn't even think about. I've watched that happen numerous times. Sorry, didn't mean to sidetrack you. Go ahead.
No, it's
wanted
good.
to make sure people knew that. Like, speak out, man. Tell people how you feel. Or if someone gives you a really bad recruiting message, tell them that too.
Yeah. It's funny. I just got a really bad pitch, and I was like, no. And I even gave her, and they're like, oh, thank you actually so much for this.
Yeah. Oh my God. The ones who respond and they're like, yeah, I'm being coached to do this. I'm like, yeah, let me guess. You're 22 years old and have no idea what you're recruiting for. They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. This is how you should do this. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so you actually respond back to the recruiter and say, we're actually considering for sales engineering, and that's for Appian.
Yeah. So I ended up going through that process, interviewed, and I think, for folks knowing the intended audience of this podcast, I was good at presenting and engaging the audience, and I had tech skills, but you have no idea what you're getting yourself into in sales engineering.
Yep, that's true.
It's as if you walk through, the analogy I'll give is, so I love the movie Home Alone. Okay. And Home Alone, there's a scene where he's up at the top of the stairs and he's on his sled, and he's going to go sledding out the front door, right? And if you're really far away from the front door, you can only see a little bit of what's outside. But then as you creep closer to that front door and you're standing right in the door frame and you look outside, you can see everything.
Right.
And that is a lot of what it's like getting into sales engineering. Sure. Where you start and you think it's this little strip that's out there in the front door. And then you get closer in and you're like, whoa, I got no idea what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that's probably every single first sales engineer's experience almost to the T. That's so funny. But continue. Oh, that's so funny.
So, you know, I got through the interview process fine, started to work there, and then I had, gosh, the best mentor ever. Like,
who is it?
This was this guy. He was a few years older than me, super technical, like very engaging, had a lot of my personality traits. And I think that's a huge thing for folks that are looking for mentors. Definitely look for people that are not similar to you, but also look for people that are similar to you, because you can just follow in their path. So like Phil, man, when he would do stuff, I'd be like, that's exactly how I want to do it. That's who I want to be when I grow up. And it was the first time that I saw people, and I didn't see this like in a lot of folks in Deloitte. It was like, oh man, I just want to chase that guy my whole life. You know, like
I didn't have that at EY either. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
And, you know, because they got to have like similar aspirations. And I didn't really have that aspiration to like move up the chain and then go make partner at Deloitte. So I didn't really see as many role models there as I did with watching Phil. So I would just watch Phil and be like, oh my gosh, like Phil's doing this, like, let's go do this. Because I know Phil and my interests are aligned. So having a great like model and kind of mentor there was huge. And then, yeah, I always knew that I was going to get into sales, but Phil ended up moving into sales. So Ruby
naturally,
might be somewhat influenced by Phil being in sales.
Sure.
But yeah, that was definitely a big spark. But you hear it from like a lot of different folks. There was, you know, that you end up taking on more responsibility within the sales cycle. I had several sales RVPs approach me about moving into sales.
Wow, good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think if you know, that one, those were things that I had told some of them that I was interested, and then others had just approached me not even knowing and just saying, you'd be good at this. But I think it's definitely best to express the interest, because, you know, what's really on a sales leader or a sales, even engineering leader's mind is, and I would give this advice to anyone looking for a job. You don't want a project if you don't have to have one. And what I mean by that is a person that comes in, you want them to be as close to kind of fully enabled as you can get them. And it's really hard for us to guess where you're at. So my recommendation always to people that are looking for jobs is write down on a sheet of paper. I literally somebody hit me up yesterday and I was like, write down on a sheet of paper, presentations, sales, and technical skills.
We're getting some free alpha pre-sales coaching right here. I love this. This is fantastic.
And I'm like, write down these three things and then grab all of your experience and see if you can put it into these buckets.
Sure.
And you might find that you're awesome at presentations and you're awesome at sales and you have zero technical skills. Then go learn tech. Or
yes. Okay.
If it's this and you have no sales skills, go fill in that gap. Or if you haven't given a presentation, go join Toastmasters. Like, it's easy to do that when you write down what the client is interested in. And that's, I think, that's why it's important. The reason why sales managers were looking at me is because they're thinking, I need somebody who knows the product, who knows sales, who knows Appian, who knows like all the things that I need as a sales rep. Sure, I got to teach them sales, but it's not that hard when you've got the other components already in there.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And it's so funny you mentioned that, because I remember there was a conversation I was having, the sales director, Tima Muller. I don't know if she's listening to this right now, but if you are, hey, Tima. I remember we were having just drinks at her house. She had the whole team over. It was like, we were doing a QBR and she's had people over the place. And, you know, she pulls me over. She's like, so when are you joining my team? And I said, Tima, and I think UiPath kind of protected me from this a little bit, because UiPath, they pay pretty well. And the way we're compensated as sales engineers is actually, it's full base no matter what. and then bonus on top of it. So like if you're sitting there, it's like I don't really necessarily have to worry about quota. And I said, Tima, I'm protected by this salary. I'd have to work twice as hard to land this. I know what your deal sizes are. She's like, yeah, it's a fair point. You'd have to grind a little bit. I'm like, yeah, Tima, like I like supporting you guys instead.
Yeah.
But she said very similar things where it's like, it's just like that. Like, okay, he clearly knows the product. He clearly knows how to present. I can teach him the sales acumen if he wants it. Right. So it's just so funny because I find so many people, like, I feel like sometimes we get the bad rep with sales, just like you had talked about before. Like no one wants to hear the sales rep. But if you're the sales rep that has that, hold on. Now it's a completely different conversation. And now back tying to what you had said before, now you've got that one-stop shop that you can talk about. And then when you want to pull that stud who's sitting on the bench waiting for you to pull him in, he's your 6-man all-star, and he's gonna carry it home for you. And then of course you get the kickback and you get the commission, and then you spoil him and his wife to, or husband or whatever it is, right? To go out to dinner and do that, right? And it's just, but I like the whole concept of what you broke down right there that helps people become self-aware, because I think people really struggle to document what they've done. And I think it's a really, really good exercise, especially like, and you do it on LinkedIn. I know I do it very well on LinkedIn. Like, you want to see my crash course? It's there. You want to see everything I've done? It's there. I keep my resume updated. I do all of that, not because I care to get a job, but more along the lines of exactly what you're talking about. Keep looking at what I've done so I can show people all of that. I completely align. And it wasn't meant to be about me. It's just more like I can align with that so much. And I hope people listening to that can like look at us and say like, oh, wow, like, okay, how do I emulate that? I've had people literally reach out to me and be like, your LinkedIn's amazing. I'm like, yeah, because I gave you literally everything I did. But that's important because now I can tie, where were my presentation skills being honed? EY. Where was my sales skills being honed? UiPath. Where was my technical skills? It's right in between, right? Like I can literally tie it, all of that. And it's, I think, formulated into, like I said, I think I'm eventually going to be a salesperson. It's just a matter of when, not if. I think it's just a matter of when. Okay. So let's keep talking about that. So you eventually become a sales rep, right? What were some gotchas that happened when you first started in sales specifically? Because I'd be curious to hear like what you ran into. Because I think from a sales engineering perspective, a lot of the audience probably has gone through pre-sales academy, course careers. They've probably learned, okay, this is what sales engineering is. And just like you said, you have the sliver of the door and then you get exposed. But sales, I think, is a whole nother animal. What were some of the things that you learned transitioning from sales engineering to sales reps that you'd want to share with us in terms of if someone's trying to make that move? I think it'd be really cool to hear.
So the most important thing if you're trying to make the move is you really got to drop your ego. And it's, dude, it's brutal. Like, even if you know, all right, I'll give you an example. I was more technical than probably 90% of my sales engineers because I had a software development background. But the client doesn't know that. And even if the client does know that, the client doesn't trust you as much because you make money when the client buys something. Like, that's a huge conflict of interest. So you're going to walk in and just everything that got you to where you are right now is no longer relevant or important for the client. So it really is a completely different role. So on the mental side, you got to be cool with the fact that you're going to wake up every single day and you're going to look at the mirror and you're going to see this, nice, humble, like happy person. And then everyone else is going to look at you and see the scum of the earth because you're in sales. And you basically like can get out of that reputation by, being a good human being. But on the first like bit, when someone meets you, that's what they think. You got to be comfortable with telling people that you're in sales. And, most sales engineers don't like to say that.
Sure. So, yeah, that's fair.
You got to be able to do that. So mentally, you got to be prepared to be like, it's not, I'm going to do this thing. And I'm going to be not well liked for it. And you know what? The money's going to be worth it. So that's thing one. Once you get into the role, you think you know how to sell, and then you have no idea how to sell. And I'll tell you, there's some huge weaknesses that SEs have. This is a lot of, the Alpha's pre-sales curriculum at this point. Number one, you don't know how to lead clients to a decision, because the thing about being a sales engineer is you come in, the sales cycle is like this long, and you come in for this super specialized piece in the middle called pre-sales. And with a lot of these platform sales, let's be honest, it's a lot bigger.
I mean, I'm supporting everything pre and post. I mean, they still are at UiPath. Like, it's no exception. Yeah.
But the difference there is when you are in sales, you've got to progress the deal as quickly as possible. And that's why I'd say the role of a sales engineer is not to convince the client. The role of the sales engineer is to help the client make a decision. That is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because they want to just sit there and collect more information. So you've got to figure out how to get through that sales cycle and get the client to decide. And so when I'm thinking about it, I'm not thinking about how do I get to the next step. It's how do I close this thing in the shortest amount of time? Because that means the client gets their solution in the shortest amount of time.
There you go.
So prospecting is brutal. It's so hard. It's the hardest thing you possibly can learn. Like the SDR job is the hardest job in sales.
I don't understand for the life of me why SDRs aren't like 10-year experienced sales professionals. To me, I think the whole thing's backwards, to be honest. Like I'm 100% serious about that. I know we've already substantiated we can pay some kids out of college or some people trying to break in to do the SDR role, but I think that should be flipped. I'm being completely real with you. Wow, I can't believe you said that. That's amazing.
It's brutal. It's the hardest job. It's all rejection. It's terrible. So you gotta if you want to go into sales, you got to be comfortable. Like that's what you got to do. So when I tell people, it's like have the right mindset. You got to know that you got to drop your ego. You've got to be way more comfortable with uncertainty and rejection. You've got to learn some new skills like leadership, and then also prospecting. And then if you can get through that, if you can get the prospecting stuff there, you're usually in pretty good shape. But that's usually the hardest one. And then just getting the client to make a decision, because you're going to be used to giving demos, stuff like that. You've got to figure out how to close deals without giving demos and POCs and that kind of thing, because you're never going to be able to have time to go through all of those. And I mean, not even do it all yourself. It's just when you're working an op with more than one or two POCs, two different ops with POCs.
Sure.
It's so time intensive. You can't stay focused on your client like you're supposed to.
No way.
So it's a real tough transition, but if you have patience and you're committed to it, some of the best AEs are former SEs. And I've now asked more people this, and that's the thing that I'm getting from these leaders is they say, if the SE can make the jump, the SE is usually one of the best AEs.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because even some of the, I haven't pulled him on, but I'm planning on doing it. His name's Kishore Pardasani. He was a rep I worked with. He had some baller deals at UiPath. He was an SE for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. And it was just, and having the conversation, he's like, KJ, I can't build this out, but I know you can. I'm like, okay, cool. What do you need? Right. But he knew, and it never came off as I need you to do this to land my deal. He said, I think if we do this, this is going to substantiate the solution's going to work, so I can do the rest. That's the way it was presented. And I learned so much from that. Another guy, Keith Johnson, he was an SE at, I think K2. Yeah. And then eventually he got the sale. I think one of his first sales gigs was at UiPath. So I'm totally aligning to what you're saying. And that's why I think I made that comment before around I'm noticing a mesh. But I want to bring this back to what we see in the tagline of Alpha Pre-Sales. Would you argue that you becoming the sales rep, betting on yourself, so to speak, led you to starting this up and kind of letting this be your gig from here on out? Would you say that that's probably that skill of learning humility, drop your ego, learn how to be an SDR? Do you think that propelled you to be like, hey, I'm really going to do this for myself? Or, was it something else? Because obviously I see you bang out content all the time and it's fantastic. And I know you have a great business, and I can see just based on the website alone, you have Procore on there. It's some other, companies that were in there. They're obviously soliciting your guidance. So was that it that kind of pushed you, or was it a culmination of everything?
Yeah, it really wasn't one individual thing, but it's some self-awareness, realizing that this is what you're good at. Having done it for so much. I mean, when I was at Appian, I was coaching, I did most of the enablement before enablement was even a thing.
Been there, man. Totally get that. They give you some enablement role, and I'm like, we know you have a whole enablement team. You really just need someone to synthesize it, but I can do that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So you end up doing these things that Alpha Pre-Sales is a year old. I've been doing it for 8 years now at this point, because I've been coaching, So there was that. And then, I originally had thought I'm going to go and I'm going to help SEs get into the sales role. And that I still have plans to help out with that. And I've got a program I may be launching here soon on that. But it was that. And then the idea of just, like I said, when I got that question from when my SE asked my client a question and then got a completely different answer, I'm like, oh, we could be so much more effective as salespeople if the SEs were just better. And there's no real, like, it's not, like, there's not enough sales training for SEs. There's demo training, there's other stuff. But for sales reps, there's 18 different things.
Yeah, people have their different spin on MedPick. Like, we have done force management the whole night. Yeah, exactly. But I never got anything for pre-sales. You're correct. Yeah.
And that was it. I said, I could train demos. There's plenty of folks that can train demos, but I was like, I don't think that's the missing link for a lot of folks. I think the missing link for a lot of AEs or SEs is all behavioral stuff. One, they're too agreeable. Two, they usually can't get to the point. And three, it takes 10 minutes to answer a simple question. So those are things where you just got to get better at discovery, asking questions, that kind of thing. So it was a lot of confluence of factors, if you will, that moved me into it. But yeah, I've considered myself a coach or kind of teacher for a long time.
Well, I mean, you got a board in front of you and you know how to write backwards, which is also pretty incredible, to be honest with you. I think that's pretty dope. And that's a great skill that you've learned, because that's not like some, crud there. Like, that's actually really legible text. Like, I got to give you some credit for that. But you brought up something there, and before we bring us home, is you said doing better discovery. What's the one thing that makes you that allows you to do better discovery? Is it really learning a persona, or is it really understanding how your technology solves a problem? Because I'd argue it's the latter, but I'd love to hear your perspective around what you're coaching to help people do better discovery, because I really think a lot of deals are make or break in that discovery phase naturally. But I think that's where you start building that trust and credibility and creating that retention that we're always looking for. So I'd be curious to hear what you think is the number one thing to do better discovery.
I can't focus on a number one thing. I don't think.
Maybe not number one. Maybe that was too direct. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I do. Like whenever I see it, I go in and I look at what the discovery questions. I actually ask my trainees, send me your discovery questions, and then what I do is I see where the gaps are. So usually they're all like technically focused discovery questions. And they're usually aligned to the product, which is fine. Oh, are you having problems with a bunch of manual systems? It's like, okay, like who's going to answer that?
Let me insert any automation tool here.
That's what I mean. So
yeah, okay.
So when that's the issue, a lot of times I like to teach SEs what they're going for in discovery. And for that, it's simple. This is like sales 101. My most simple discovery methodology is the 3 whys. It's why do anything, why do anything now, and why do anything with you. And if you can answer those 3 questions, that's what your person you're selling to is going to have to tell their boss.
Right.
Their boss is going to be like, should we buy UiPath right now? And then they're going to have to say, yes, we should buy UiPath. Well, can it wait for 6 months? Yeah, probably. You don't have a deal now.
Yeah, it's delayed down the line. Have fun.
So
it's unqualified. Yep.
So I want the SEs to ask their technical questions, but they also have to know enough to know if the AE is going down a rabbit hole and he doesn't have these things. Because the AE is going to think that they have why anything, why us, and why now. But a lot of times they don't, because they're not skilled enough technically to know how big of a problem this is, or if there are alternatives. And that's where SEs have to be more sales-like in discovery.
Yep.
So I it's kind of a roundabout answer. I don't think it's any individual thing, but I like what you said, because I think I remember you talking about it or somebody talking about it. I don't know if it was on LinkedIn or Slack. One of the biggest problems is knowing what you're selling.
Oh my God. It was probably me, because, and I'll say this candidly, it's okay. Like, I do find I am much like you, a very, very technical SE. But I also think the reason I've been successful as an SE is because I'm very technical. And I think there have been times where I've either saved deals or built bigger ones down the line due to my aptitude in actually understanding how the technology solves the problem. It's not
Mhm.
just like you described, right? Is not you have antiquated systems and you don't have any way to connect the two because you're trying to drive some business impact to not increase headcount. Okay, cool. Insert any automation tool here. And then you talk about, well, why UiPath? Well, guess what? We're the number one screen scraper on the planet. That's pretty damn good, especially if you don't have a back-end connection. Okay, cool. Creating that demand. If I don't actually know how to show that, I'm selling vaporware and a dream. And that's where, to me, in my opinion, I can actually lean on being more technical, just like you said, because then a rep can come on behind and be like, hey, that impact, what are we tying that to? And then eventually, as you get that unconscious competence, over time, you're asking the same question. So when I go in and I can show, literally, I'm telling you, like, if you told me, show me how UiPath can automate this thing, I can do that like tomorrow. Like, that's not even
Yeah.
a question. But then it becomes, why do you need this? Who is asking for this? What can we tie it to? What C-suite initiative is there? But you see what I mean is like, I want you to learn that unconscious competence first. And I know it's harder for others. I get that. But I think it was probably a thread that I was on where I was in the minority where I'm like, are you guys even technical? Like, hold on. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Because I feel like at a certain point, just like you said, and I think we alluded to it in the very beginning of this conversation, you said the AE and the SE can ask the same question and get two completely different responses. And it's because you're the trusted advisor from a technical perspective, or at least the perceived technical expert. So I feel like if you're actually a technical expert, you're probably going to have more success. Now, mind you, I do think everything we talked about is super, super important. But I almost feel like if you're eliminating that tech part, especially as technologies get a little bit more standardized, aren't you going to have to learn how to show people? Am I thinking too deep? I don't know. I'm asking you, right? Because you see this all the time. I had one lens for a while, right? But to me, that's how I felt, and that's how I've been very, very successful in my career. But I'd be curious to hear, like, what you said on like the minority of like having the dichotomy. I'm just curious, like, do you align with
Technical
it?
skills give you so much confidence.
I
So
think that's what it is. Yeah.
You're way more compelling if you have the technical skills in the backup. And that's getting reps. And then the other part is having the technical competence. So I think it's always good to have tech skills. Just don't let it be now where you can't talk about business stuff because you are too enamored by the functionality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes, I think in the software space, we struggle with that. Like, even you'll see the comparisons. Like, if you go to like G2 is like a great example of that, right? Where G2 will almost compare feature and functionality. And if you're basing your decision on feature and functionality, you're missing out on the intangibles, like working with this specific software vendor. What's the support like? What's our customer success look like? Like, what feeling do I get, right? Like, am I actually sold $1 in a dream because a bunch of people got paid to go, right? You see what I'm saying is like, you're alluding to that. And I agree. And I think sometimes it's very easy for us to say like, oh, you need something to extract data from a document. Oh, check out this OCR tool. It's like, yeah, but like, we could probably find a way to convert it to text and get you 50% of your value right now, but you don't even know that because you don't even have the technical lens to get there.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like, and that's a flip. Now, mind you, does it derail deals? And as an AE, you're like, why the hell are you saying that, KJ? But eventually it's like, yo, we're talking about customer retention here and being able to work with your AE. And you see what I'm saying is like, I go down all this path and I'm not trying to say like, oh, look at me, but it's more like what you're describing makes perfect sense. And I think for anyone trying to break into technology, the reason I think we're having this conversation is you've got to be able to somewhat do it all and lean into your specific strength. In my opinion, that's what I'm getting, at least from this conversation. Would you agree? I mean, is that what you're getting as you're coaching people, or?
No, I would even say you don't have to have it all. We'll put it this way. If there's anyone watching this that is trying to get in, don't assume you have to have it all. Just be clear about what you have and what you don't have.
Sure.
For example, getting back to this, if you came to me and you said, I am excellent at presentations and I'm excellent in sales and I don't have technical skills. However, I'm willing to learn. This is my technical experience. I'm, awesome on, let's say, Salesforce, even though I'm applying to UiPath, whatever it is.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Tell me what the gap is. And then I can evaluate and see, okay, that's a hole. I got to spend some time there. But wait, he's already said it this and I don't have to worry about any of that. Oh, that sounds great. So just tell me what you are good at, what you're not good at. And then if it's not a big enough gap, like if you're just only have one skill on each one of these, presentation or sales or technical, and I got to get you way up on all three of them, that's more work than just having one gap.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm with you on you need to be aware of what
I think that's a better term. I think you're right. Yeah, awareness or exposure to it, which is why I think Pre-Sales Academy, Pre-Sales Collective, Course Career, they're great for that because they expose you to the whole motion. But that's only, like you said, that's one tick mark, not the whole thing. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Then build it out, the areas that you've got. Having the tick mark is great, but then, building it out's awesome.
Yeah. Got a little guy here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got my family just walking in the back, no big deal. So with that, I think it's a nice little transition here. It's going to be a nice little cut as we come through it. But in all seriousness, as we round out the session here, because I want to make sure you have a little time before your 3 p.m. And I'm sure we could talk forever. And I'm sure this won't be the last time, of course. I think we've kind of alluded to it. You've given some advice in between. But if people wanted to follow the Rue Dickinson path, they want to, get to a point where maybe they're even coaching on their own. Maybe they see an opportunity for that. What is the one thing that you would recommend people start doing now to get to where you're at? And I know that's a super loaded question.
I have two answers that come to mind. Okay. One is touchy-feely, and then the other is practical. So I'll use both. The touchy-feely one is like, follow your heart. And I say that because, I've been selling homemade jerky on the school bus since I was in 3rd grade.
Wow. Wow. You're like every financial advisor ever. That's like, I was selling shoes in my dorm room or whatever.
Like, if you started up a lemonade stand as a kid, you might want to consider sales or entrepreneurship.
Sure.
Like, what you do at that age is usually indicative of who you are as a person. So that's where I say follow your heart. And I'm so glad that I took this detour to get into tech and be a developer and learn all these skills, because now it helps me now be a salesperson and a leader and a coach for those people. But it's funny where it takes you 30 years to come back around to where you're at.
Sure.
So that would be my number one thing, is like, just find what you really like gravitate toward. And you might not know how to make money in it, and that's okay. And that leads to my second thing, which is, don't come up with the problem yourself or the thing that you want to do necessarily. Go ask the market what they want. And so I went and asked the market. I asked a bunch of sales engineering leaders what they had an issue with. They're like, my guys are geniuses, but they get too into the weeds. So I learned everything I could on how to stop that problem. And now I'm selling it. Like, I had to do it myself. I had that problem, but like, that's the issue, right? So my recommendation is to go find something that people are willing to pay money to solve. And that's if you're selling anything, if you're building anything, whatever it is, just go do that and focus on what the client needs, and then trust your heart.
I love it. I think that's it. I think we end on that, because I think what you just described is very transferable to any career. Following your heart, you always want to have a passion. Like, I've always, and I can align to it, because I've always had a passion, like educating people. I always wanted to be a teacher. But if I'm going to be a sole income provider in the United States of America, being a teacher is not going to cut it, right? But I always found ways to teach in the roles that I have. And some advice that I align to, just like with that as well, is I always tell people, I'm like, work for the role that you want, not the role that you have. And I think it aligns so much to what you're saying, because you're taking all of your skills and substantiating what you're good at and fulfilling a need and a demand, right? We talked about me being in economics, right? The supply is low, the demand is high, right? So go fill that demand with your skills. Because I'm telling you, in every single role I've had, from literally being at Galaxy Promotions as a radio jock, right? Not jock, but because I was a jock in radio in college, but like setting up remotes, to working at EY, to being an ISG, I was always finding ways to teach people. Always. And I still do to this day. My wife thinks it's the most annoying thing in the world. She's like, people don't need help. I'm like, shut up. Yes, they do. Right. But also, it's the same thing. And you said it in just a different way. And I completely align. I think it's fantastic for everyone to hear. Rue, this has been a great conversation. Full transparency, this is the first time we've ever chatted like this. So if you liked what you heard, give us obviously a subscribe and a like if you see it anywhere else. Rue, is it okay if people follow you, connect with you on LinkedIn and contribute to your content? I'm sure you're going to say yeah, but
yeah, totally. Reach out, DM me. I love getting DMs from people too. So
you do.
Don't think I'm not approachable. People just like assume that you are way too busy for things. Like, look, if you hit me up and they have something good to say, I'll respond back. So.
Yeah, you messaged me back immediately. Like, oh, word, cool. Like, let's do this. Like, it was very, very easy to have this combo. No, granted, the importance of obviously having the network. You're connected to Dom. Shout out to Dom with conversations with Dom under the Breaking Into Tech umbrella. But I just want to say I appreciate this conversation. I think you're a good one. I think we're very, very similar in general. In case you couldn't tell by this conversation, but I just want to say I really, really appreciate you taking the time, man. Seriously, it's I'm finding more and more of these sessions are not only beneficial for me, but they're also beneficial for everyone watching. So thank you. Seriously. I really, really appreciate that.
Likewise. It's been awesome to hear a little bit more about your story as well. So
yeah, for sure, man. That's what I try to share. This has been KJ's Corner. You can give Rue Dickinson a follow. Search him. You see his name right there. Alpha Presales. You can go check out the website. Website's actually pretty slick and cool. I'm going to see if I can score one of those polos at some point. As I mentioned, this has been KJ's Corner. Rue, thank you once again. And we will see y'all next time. Cheers, guys.